Story 2, Defeat the Giant Spearman. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Wario Land 2. In the last part we polished off the rest of Chapter 2, and now we're in Chapter 3 and we're gonna go finish this place off very quickly today as well. So something this level in specific does very frequently, in fact this world does it a couple times even, oftentimes if there's a puddle of water that goes off screen, there's a hidden passageway at the very bottom of it you can swim along that will either have coins in it or allow you to technically skip a puzzle element on that screen. For instance, that allows us to skip those fire blocks there. And there are times where that's just the faster thing to do, but oftentimes if you want to get every coin you can, you gotta go back and do other things anyway. Although speaking of faster things to do, this game's speed run's very funny for reasons we'll talk more about at about the halfway point of the LP. Let me put it like this, all levels is about an hour long, any percent is about 8 minutes, and I just find that kind of, I always find games with that exact kind of differential very funny, but also incredibly interesting for both the technical aspects on why the game does what it does, but also the process of how the speedrunners found those techniques. Ocarina of Time, I'm looking at you, of course. Now, when we go back to the previous room, something to note is they actually bring back a mechanic from a very specific level of Wario Land 1 here, invisible pitfalls. In specific, wherever there's not a tree trunk in the background is a pitfall, so make sure you watch out for those, and otherwise you'll just have to start the room over. For now, time for one of this level's main things, auto-scrolling turtle sections. You jump on their back, they start swimming to the right, platform along with them to keep up and reach the end of the room. The annoying thing is, whenever you enter a door for things in this specific section, for coins, or in the case of treasure rooms in a room like this, you do effectively just get thrown into the current upon leaving. You have to start the room all over, but given how often you're doing that in this game anyway, for one reason or another, it's not that big of a deal. So our mission title here is Defeat the Giant Spearman. That's going to be a giant version of that enemy I just killed effectively. Get used to seeing this. This is the most common mission type in the game in the long run, besides just reaching a goal door. And honestly, it's kind of a boon in one regard, but I'll reach that when we reach the actual mini-boss fight at the end of the level. Now, one thing worth noting is that auto-scroll adjacent mechanics like this tend to be kind of annoying in that they're usually too slow or too fast. The turtle is slower than Wario's base movement, but it still moves at a decent enough click where you're never really waiting for it at the same time as well, especially with the platforming or block breaking you'll have to do as Wario on top of things. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the weird bouncing bug from the Mole Knight stage in Shovel Knight, where, yes, it's a mechanic and you don't have to worry about it, but it's not overly tedious compared to a lot of other auto-scrolling adjacent mechanics. I say adjacent because it's not exactly your standard auto-scroll, it's more just a moving platform you have to keep up with. Now, we're coming up on the treasure room of this particular stage, and the annoying thing about it is we do need Fire Wario to get to it. But in specific, we have to deal with one of the more annoying parts of Fire Wario platforming, where before you get fully engulfed, you do need to kind of jump around platforms in a certain way to keep yourself in one area. Depending on where you place the enemy, it's very easy to actually light on fire when you're jumping there, and that can just lead to problems as you need to backtrack up there and all that. Although that does technically spare the enemy, because Fire Wario can just kill the torture enemy very quickly if you're not careful. In fact, 9 times out of 10 when you use Fire Wario, just because of how that works, you will kill the enemy, just because of how the platforms themselves are usually arranged. So with that, we can now continue on the level, and there's 2 ways you can do so. You can either go get another torture enemy, like I'm about to do, and break down those fire blocks, or you can do the faster but more hidden thing. That pool of water, like the one earlier in the stage, has a hidden passage at the bottom right of it that allows you to go all the way towards where the door is. I do showcase both methods technically, and if you're wondering why I didn't just do the one, it's because I didn't remember I could do it until I saw the pool on the other side towards where the door is. Whoops. Worth noting, I practiced every level for this game, but I only ran it once, which in total makes this technically my, what? 4th, 5th, and 6th playthroughs at most, maybe? Again, I've not played Wario Land as a series nearly as much as other Mario platformers. Not because I don't find it interesting, it's just because I find it harder to go back to in general. Because if I'm in the mood for a platformer, I am in the mood for something a lot more straightforward and action-packed, which is why actually sometimes I gravitate more towards Sonic than Mario to begin with. But especially why I gravitate towards, like, Ninja Gaiden and Mega Man a lot. For right now, though, let's talk about the Giant Spearman. Like I said, he's just a larger version of the base Syrup Pirate. He takes several jumps and ground pounds to kill, but if you're good about staying on top of him and holding the A button to get that extra bounce, you can just combo him and he'll never be able to get off the ground. In fact, you don't even have to touch the ground at all. Upon killing him, he drops 100 coins and you complete the level. Get used to doing that because that's just one of like at minimum like 6 times we have to do that in the game, maybe even more than that. It's common. Also worth noting, moving forward in the LP, I actually also speed up the panel entering the grid because that's just an extra little bit of time we don't need. Through the Thorny Maze Story 3. Thorny isn't exactly the way I would describe it, but this place definitely is a maze because there's several smaller passageways that loop into each other on top of how the branches themselves curl back and forth in one area. And while there's still a lot of extra doors to get you coins and all that, this is honestly a stage whenever I come back to the game I usually just kind of skip through, getting only the bare minimum just to get the number matching game and the treasure room done along the way. Which honestly really does change how you play this game to begin with. If I had actually played this game in that general regard, instead of just trying to showcase as many coins as I know about and get just as high of a coin total as I do, genuinely we probably would be able to knock off at least a part or two from the part length, building up throughout the game. Which is sort of just a consequence of how I tend to play games on LP to begin with. Because I'm very radically different with how I play games for myself versus how I play them for recording versus how I play them for stream even. And that leads to sometimes part lengths being increased, sometimes part lengths being decreased. The best way I can put it is not only am I sometimes skipping cutscenes in games I've already played several times, just because I'm there for the gameplay at that point, but also how I go about getting 100% changes, because I'm usually a little greedier in games when I'm playing them for myself versus on LP or anything like that, as I don't need to worry about messing up as much as I would on stream, but even then I'm still kind of a perfectionist about that stuff on recording. Like I believe I foreshadowed earlier, there are several levels I did in several takes in this particular game. The big difference was how many times I got hit, or if I got lost for a second and forgot where I was going. But the biggest thing for that was if I failed either of the minigames, and that happened in at least 3 cases per world on average, I'd say. So right here we can roll down, and you can actually time your jumps to get up to here to reach where the treasure room is. Something I should note about rolling down hills in this game is that how immediately Wario rolls into a ball depends on 2 factors. How high up you are on the hill when you press the down button, and also how long the hill itself is, because there's several times if you roll too low to the ground, where before he rolls into a ball, Wario will just continue his sliding animation on the ground for a good couple of tiles. And that can get in your way if you're trying to just get through in one case. Actually, you know what? One roll might be a better way to parse that. And admittedly, you should really practice rolling as much as you can when you can. For one specific level way later in the LP where it's the central mechanic of sorts. Because largely every single mechanic Wario has does sort of at least have one level where it's the main focus. Be it rolling, be it using the owl, each transformation has at least one level where it's the key thing. Largely, though, later games do a better job at interspersing the abilities in such a way where everything might get a use in a level in some form. Wario Land 4 especially is very good at that, but that's because Wario Land 4, for all my misgivings about it, probably has the smartest level design in the series. Which, given what the genre of the series becomes by that point, feels about right, honestly. At this point, though, because we are using the owl, we have reached the thorns of the Thorny Maze. They're just rotating spikes in place. They only really rotate for the animation's sake. Again, as long as Wario himself doesn't touch them, you're completely fine. On my practice run, I actually went for those coins up there, but I decided it's just not really worth it at this point. You will note there's just certain points in the game where I kind of eschew going for some extra coins along the way, like that, especially when this close to the end of the level. That's largely due to 2 reasons. Either A, I was sick of the level and wanted to move on, or B, I went, I already have enough. I'm good. I'm gonna get a profit on this pretty much universally, no matter what. Not that profits really matter, but seeing that coin total go up does induce some amount of happiness in my soul. Chapter 3, Story 4, Escape from Maze Woods. Man, we took a stage to get here. We have an entire stage dedicated to leaving it, and we're not even at the boss fight yet? Come on, game. What's up with that, huh? So that bee enemy there. They give Wario another state. If you get stung by their stingers, we become Puffy Wario, who slowly floats up, and when he hits a ceiling tile of any type, will either break it or just depuff himself. It, like with certain other Wario types, is closer to being an obstacle that there are some moments where you need to use it to find some secrets. And it's honestly one of the more annoying ones because the progress you lose is almost much more immediate. With that said, there is a little thing you can do with it where, for some reason, when Wario is crouching, even if he's crouch jumping or crouch walking, because you can walk by crouching, I forget if I mentioned that already, Wario is just completely immune to the bee's stinger for some reason. I'm not sure if it's like an oversight or something, or if it's intentional, but if you're ever at a point where you see several of those bees in a row, just crouch and you'll be largely pretty safe. And I appreciate moments like that, even if it's unintended, as it goes a long way to make the levels a smoother experience. At that point, though, I actually decided to do my rare proper jump cuts in the LP. Just to go get the turtle back here, because it took me about 15-20 seconds. I'm like, yeah, that probably will be long enough that I can just jump cut past that. If you stay on the turtle all the way to the end of this particular screen, you actually find a second door that largely houses a lot of coins that you need to get through by throwing an enemy vertically. I already mentioned my issues with aiming vertically with enemies in this game to begin with, but I feel like a way they could have fixed it if they did have console Wario Land game more often or earlier, because the only console games in this series technically are Wario World, which already feels very different, and Shake It, which is a lot closer. I feel the way they could have resolved some of that is either by giving you a Yoshi's Island adjacent aiming reticle, or at least, as the throw strength increases, show a line indicating how it's gonna travel, so you can maybe plan around it in that regard. Be something kind of neat to see if they ever decide to make another Wario Land game at this point, but I feel like at this point that's unlikely, besides maybe ports to the Nintendo online services for these games, as at this point Wario's identity largely is just WarioWare, and that's neat. I like WarioWare's aesthetics, I like its tone and all that. I just wish I liked playing it more. Because minigames like that only go so far with me, really. It's like me in Animal Crossing, where I appreciate a lot about it, but I just can't really get into playing it too much. This is an area right here, by the way, where you really want to make sure you're crouching when you get past those bees, otherwise you're probably going to take a lot of excess stinging, wasting your time, ultimately. Now, something I'm still not very sure about when it comes to this game's platforming is actually the stoves we can press around. As you dash into them, sometimes they'll have a small hop, sometimes they'll have a large hop. I'm going to see if I can find something about it between now and the second pass. But it feels like it's largely random, but it might just be positioning based, or maybe how far into your animation you are when you hit them based. Like sometimes I swear I'm right next to them, I get a guaranteed large hop, other times it's a small hop, and I can't tell if it is actually set or not. Not that it's that big of a deal, it's largely just a pacing thing where it's like, yeah, it takes a lot longer if you get a lot of the short hops for some reason, but if you get like 2 large hops, you're already there. Again, not a big deal, just kind of confuses me. Largely because compared to everything else in the game, it's the only object I can think of that really has a couple of different reactions that can happen. Largely, if you shoulder charge it or roll or do anything else into something else, it does one set thing. So the fact that it's that random is just kind of odd to me. Now, as someone who started with Wario Land 4, Puffy Wario in my memory is definitely a lot more annoying there than it is here, but I think that's largely because you run into it a lot sooner, and given how troublesome that was for me to beat when I was a kid, that probably just kind of conflated my experiences with it here to be worse than they actually tend to be. Because it's only really in a handful of levels in this game, and this is the first of only like, at most maybe 3 or 4 that it's in. And even then, in the other ones, it's usually a punishment rather than a central mechanic for you to actually use. For as many transformations as Wario really has in Wario Land 2 Beyond, some of them don't get a lot of screen time, especially in their earliest occurrences. Now, getting this specific little spearman up there is easy using the puffing Wario. The rough thing is you really have to place yourself depending on its movement, otherwise you can get easily knocked off like that. But also it's very easy to just accidentally knock it off while you are trying to pick it up there, because of how short the ceiling is in this little segment here. Now you can make that a little easier if you just charge to the right here, but depending on where you put it and all that and how far it's walking and all that, if you're not patient and you don't wait for it to come somewhere else, you could get into some trouble there. I know I have on several occasions. Largely behind these enemy blocks are just extra coins, but I'm greedy and want them. But otherwise, we're basically at the end of the level as it is, as we heard a moment ago, but also this is where the treasure room for this level is. Almost done with Chapter 3. When I first played this, I actually got stuck on how to reach the door in this room for a little bit. Because for some reason, whenever there's a hill in this game you can roll down that's too short, I just forget I can roll down it sometimes. But what we need to do is destroy all these blocks and then roll down that hill all the way to the left and time our jumps between these platforms to get to the door. It can be a little precise, especially given the thing I mentioned earlier, where depending on how high you start a hill roll, Wario might not start rolling on the ground immediately, but you'll get it eventually, is the best way to put it. It's not too hard, it just takes some time to figure out the timing on all that. And given the size of the room, it's not like backtracking to get there takes that long to begin with. Thus, we are on to the final stage of Chapter 3 after I get this 1 or a 7. There we go. Thus, it is time for Chapter 3, Story 5, Defeat the Giant Bee. This stage is where it really comes in handy to remember the thing I'd already told you, where if you hold down to crouch when you're near any of the bee enemies, their sting can't really affect you, as that will also apply, based on that text, of course, in the boss fight itself. It will go a long way to actually make that boss fight less annoying. Otherwise, this could technically be one of the harder boss levels in the game. Not that that really means too much. I'd say at hardest, while this game might get annoying if you lose to a boss and get booted out again and again, at its hardest, this game maybe hits like a 4 on a 10 scale. And even then, that's usually like super endgame challenges and all that. If anything, because the minigames themselves are always the same and are mostly just luck-based, there's never really a frustration that comes from that. It's more about just, god dang it, kind of level. Which is very important to me in a minigame, I think, because there's sometimes where games have minigames that just get too frustrating for me to want to deal with them, even when going for 100%. Like Banjo-Kazooie, for instance. I like the first Banjo-Kazooie a good bit. There's one minigame in that game I always debate skipping. And while yes, there's a way to make it easier if you just wait a world or two and get a different power-up for Banjo and Kazooie, I still am always like, do I really need to do this one? I don't need the speed-up shoes for this, I can just ignore it. There is actually one very minor control quirk of the game that becomes a little more clear in this stage, and it's one of the only times it really comes up, wherein when you roll, you move at such a rate where if you go off a ledge, you need a certain amount of clearance before you can actually continue rolling. And the way that this stage actually uses that against you is that there's going to be 2 hills on either side of a room, and there's enemy blocks down below. If you don't destroy enough enemy blocks, you're just not able to roll to either extreme direction to get the extra money that's over there. Not that it really matters too much at this point, especially if you've already done the treasure room and you already have enough to stock up. You're probably going to have enough to do the number matching minigame, no problem. But like this room in specific, if you want to get everything, it's actually surprisingly precise. Especially because, and this is mostly a me thing, I think, I find it very easy to accidentally kill enemies when I drop them or throw them too early. And I think it's just because I rush a little bit with controls in my platform because I'm so used to high reaction time type stuff. It just always feels weird, and I'm always just kind of cursing myself for that, and it's not even the game's fault, that is entirely me. Right here, we're going to have a pretty good example of what I mean by the distance you need cleared in order to roll down something like this, where here on the left, if I roll down, I'll be able to reach the coin area on the right, no problem. But because that one block is there, I'm not going to be able to get it on the left side. You need at least 3 blocks of clearance to drop down that many blocks. Again, it really doesn't come out that many times to begin with. It's maybe in like 2 levels at most, maybe 3, but worth noting all the same. For right now, time for the boss fight, the aforementioned giant bee. The bee's main attack is to hover above you, moving left and right, occasionally charging down, and if it hits you, you get inflicted with Puffy Wario. While you can avoid the main bee's attacks while crouching, I don't think you can avoid that in specific. Between the main damage phases for the first little bit and then eventually in the main phase, the beehives on the left and right sides of the screen will spawn miniature bees. They can still turn you into Puffy Wario, which is the damage state for this entire fight that'll send you back to the start of it. So be careful of that. Their sting can still be crouched, I believe, but the annoying thing is if you crouch, you're probably not going to get a high enough jump to really bump into them easily, so judge your situation accordingly with that, and you should hopefully be fine. Like most boss fights, it has its moments where it can be a little scary, especially considering in any fight, one shot's a restart, but it's not the worst thing, honestly. Again, there are much harder bosses in any other game I've played on the channel, almost. It's also one of the few bosses that doesn't have a color shift change near the bottom of its health bar, which always kind of weirded me out. But with that, we've now completed Chapter 3, and with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in Part 5, we're going to start off Chapter 4. See you guys then.